Today we're joined by Michael Oren, who's here to discuss his new memoir, Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, which is the story of his personal and professional journey that spans these two countries and their extraordinary, but also extraordinarily complicated relationship. He describes movingly his desire since the age of 15, when he was a kid living in New Jersey and a member of a Zionist youth movement, a handshake with Yitzhak Rabin that he says changed the course of his life and inspired him to devote himself to the country of Israel. He served as Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2009 until 2013, and he writes candidly of this experience and of his dealings with the Obama administration, aspects of which have been generating headlines. Oren is considered a leading Middle East scholar. The Jerusalem Post has called him one of the world's 10 most influential Jews. He's written 6 books, including 2 novels. Please join me in welcoming Michael Oren.
Thank you, everybody. What you didn't mention is that the novels, which I said before, were very well reviewed, sold dozens and dozens of copies. And you will find them in the pulp section of this bookstore. Well, shalom. Wow, this is so good to be back. I was telling the owners that one of the great joys as ambassador was to escape the embassy and wander over to politics and prose. This was the island of repose for ambassadors for many years. It's delightful to be back here. And the strange thing is, I'm looking at the audience, and about half of you are in the book, right? Because there's Jack Moline out there, who I think I described as sage and saintly, something like that. Was that okay?
My mother didn't call me.
Oh, okay. There's Elon Blutinger, my friend from junior high school, who's in the book. There's Major Steve White of the U.S. Marines, who's in the book. That's it. Basically, you're all here. That's great. That's wonderful. And so this is the book. It's called Ally. Now, I wrote it in the year after I came back from serving in Washington, which was challenging enough, considering I had to take 50 days off for last summer's war between Israel and Hamas, in which I served as a sort of unofficial spokesman for the state of Israel on international TV, and that was sufficiently challenging. And then I went into an election cycle because I'm also a member of Knesset now. But the real challenge was to find a title. And you think that that's a trivial thing. Hi, John. How are you? Rowing companion. I had no idea what to call this. And then I was sitting with my wife, Sally, one day, and I said, I know it's one word with 2 syllables. And then I said, I got it. It's ally. And she didn't get excited. She said, someone's going to look at this, and they're going to say that the title of the book is Ally. And then Sally said, someone's going to look at this and say that you left out the S. They got it. She said they won't get that. Don't underestimate these people. Ally is one of the most beautiful words in the English language. Think about it. It has no negative connotation. One can be a partner in crime, but never an ally in crime. You think ally, it's something very positive. And it's true also in Hebrew. The term for ally in Hebrew is bnei brit, ben brit, a son of a covenant. And just a gorgeous term in Hebrew. And it recalls the special relationship between the Jewish people and God. Brit, bris, brit. And Israel and the United States have a very special relationship indeed. Actually, I can't think of any 2 countries in the world, particularly this country and another foreign country, that have such a multifaceted and deep relationship. Now think about it. First of all, the relationship begins not in 1967 or 1948. It begins way back in the 17th century when the first Puritans came to this country. And the last book I wrote was called Power, Faith, and Fantasy, which explored some of those roots. But the first Puritans who came to this country and began the idea of America thought of themselves as the new Israel, the new Jews. And they had a strong connection with the old Jews, and they were convinced that it was their duty to help those old Jews get back and create a sovereign state in their sacred land, in the land of Israel. And so you had Americans like John Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, of course, Harry Truman, who would be described as Zionists today. So there's a deep spiritual connection, and that spiritual connection continues because the United States remains a pretty religious country. More people go to a house of worship of one type or another in this country than in any other industrialized country. They read the Bible. It happened to me not on more than one occasion. I would walk up to an office in Capitol Hill, into the office of some congressman from West Texas, whose district was, 5 times the size of the state of Israel, probably didn't have a single Jewish person in his constituency. He had a Bible opened up on his desk, and it was opened up to the book of Genesis, where it says, God says, those who bless my people shall be blessed. And he'd point to that thing. You know this, right? And he would say, I believe that. How much aid do you want for Iron Dome? Just like that. After a while, I ceased being shocked by it. So deep spiritual connection. 1948, Israel comes into being not just as a Jewish state, but also a democratic state. We're part of that ever-shortening list of democratic states in the world. The number's growing smaller, not larger, but we're part of a very select list of countries that have never known a second of non-democratic governance. We're up there with New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States. Never a second of non-democratic governments, even in spite of the fact we've never known a second of peace, which is quite an accomplishment. So you have spiritual ties, shared democratic values. You didn't have a strategic alliance. That is relatively new. That began after the Six-Day War. Six-Day War, Israel fights that. That was another speech I gave here on the Six-Day War book. I'm just selling all my other books here as I'm going along. In the Six-Day War, Israel fights that war with French weaponry. And it's only in the 7th day, as it were, of that war when American policymakers woke up and said, oh, there's this little superpower in the Middle East that just defeated several Soviet armed forces, and we should be allied with that country. And thus was born the U.S. Israel Strategic Alliance, which has just expanded manifoldly into fields of weapons development, intelligence sharing, joint maneuvers, special forces, just about anything you can name, it's out there. Cyber defense is very, very big right now. Very, very large. The United States gives Israel roughly $4 billion every year in military aid. 75% of that aid is spent in the United States, and it creates tens of thousands of jobs here. And so that is another part of the symbiotic relationship between Israel and the United States. And more recently, Israel has become a technological superpower, punching way above its weight. Some 200 American high-tech firms have their R&D centers in Israel. Apple, for example. Apple has never had an R&D center outside of the state of California. Today, Apple has 3 major R&D centers in Israel. So it's another sort of link, another stage in the connections between these two countries. Now, if you look around the world, think about how many countries fall into this category that have a spiritual tie with the United States, have a shared democratic system with the United States that's never been interrupted, that has a strategic alliance and a very strong high-tech economic connection. So it's a totally unique alliance. You'd be hard-pressed to find another example like this in the world. And yet, even though Israel and the United States are in many ways ultimate allies for one another, there are divides. And there are some deep divides. And there are divides that go back to 67. There are divides that go back to 1948. Settlements started after 67. But the question of Jerusalem goes back to 1948. Can you hear me back there? Okay. Okay. Goes back to 1948. So we've been divided over what has become known in more recent years as the peace process. Deep division sometimes. We have been divided over U.S. arms sales to Arab countries. Now, the book will talk about the 3 most important letters in the U.S. Israel alliance. They are QME, Qualitative Military Edge. The United States has made an historic commitment to Israel to ensure that Israel can defend itself by itself against any Middle Eastern adversary or any combination of Middle Eastern adversaries. And amazing, but every once in a while, the United States will sell several tens of billions of dollars to Arab countries in the Middle East, which also creates jobs here in the United States, but it's an issue for us. And most recently, most poignantly, most painfully, the United States and Israel are divided over the pending deal with the Iranian nuclear program. That is perhaps the deepest divide at all. And sometimes these divides can threaten to actually render the fabric of this extraordinary alliance. And that's what we have seen most recently. Now, this part of the biography wasn't said. You hear that I grew up in this country. I grew up in New Jersey. That immediately, yes, thank you. As ambassador, I always said I spend more time defending the state of New Jersey than defending the state of Israel. Perfectly good state. I was like, in a way, it's sort of a typical American kid. I was dyslexic, learning disabled, uncoordinated, clumsy, unpopular in school. Typical American kid. I grew up, I was the only Jewish kid in my neighborhood. I got beat up all the time by, anti-Semitic bullies. A true joy. But I had dreams. I had a lot of dreams. First of all, I wanted to be a writer. Which was funny because I couldn't spell. I wanted to be an Israeli. I know this is going to come out of nowhere, but I was a very proud American. My father was a veteran of World War II, still going strong. My dad, he landed on Normandy, and he raised me with all the great American values. And the book opens up with me trying to read the Lincoln's inaugural address to my kids, the Lincoln Memorial, and not being able to finish it because I keep on breaking out and crying. I'm very sentimental about this country, and believed in its ideals, was raised in its ideals, but those ideals contributed to my other great love, which because I loved the state of Israel. Now, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to live in Israel, which was also funny because I got kicked out of Hebrew school. And I actually read my bar mitzvah in transliteration. I couldn't read the thing. And why? I had this deep sense of history, of Jewish history, that I was alive at a unique moment in that history where the Jewish people had a sovereign, proud, independent state. And I was going to be damned if I was going to miss the opportunity to actually live in that state by staying in New Jersey. And for a very early age, I'm talking about 10, 11 years old, I decided I was going to live there. And at the earliest possible age, I forced myself to be onto the representatives of the kibbutz movement, so they would take me many years below the minimum age and be the youngest volunteer ever on a kibbutz in Israel. So that was, we got the whole rowing club here. It's great. And so I started going back and forth to Israel. I wanted to be a soldier. That was another dream, which was also funny because I couldn't really run, and so you couldn't think of myself running with a gun. That would have been very difficult. I had a dream that I was going to meet the girl of my dreams. You know that dream, which was pretty sad because I couldn't get a date to the junior prom. But I had these dreams, and I didn't give up on them. And in a very American fashion, I went out to fulfill my dreams. I did. I taught myself how to spell. I became a writer and historian. I went to Israel. I became an Israeli. I joined the army, became a paratrooper, learned to run with a gun, learned to run very fast with a gun. I had no choice. I met the girl of my dreams. She's over here, Sally, who didn't actually go to the junior prom because she was too cool for the junior prom. She was busy playing Frisbee with Jerry Garcia. You know, you don't go with the prom if you're busy playing Frisbee with Jerry Garcia. And we lived out this dream. But I had one more dream. And that dream goes back, I think you mentioned this, to the time when I was a kid and I had the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. and shake the hands of Israel's ambassador to the United States. And his name was Yitzhak Rabin. And he was the famed hero of the '67 war. Growing up in Jewish America, there was no greater hero than Yitzhak Rabin. And when I met him, I realized how I could resolve the two great loves of my life, my love for this country and my love for the state of Israel, by being Israel's ambassador to the United States. And when I shook his hand, I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. So I had that dream. So I'm living out the dreams. Some of the dreams, I must say, had nightmarish qualities to it. As a paratrooper, I participated in several wars. Our eldest son was wounded in battle. Sally lost her sister in a suicide attack in Israel. I got to work for Yitzhak Rabin, and only a few months later, I was present at his funeral. There were tough parts of the dream, but there was joy. We raised a family. We made a life. And then finally in 2009, I realized this ultimate dream when the newly elected Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, named me as Israel's ambassador to the United States. And I came into office at a time of just almost unprecedented challenges on so many different fronts. Now, I know this is going to sound like ancient history. Think back to the back to 2009. What was going on in this country? This country was in the depth of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. There was deep political polarization, almost logjam in Congress. There was war trauma and exhaustion after two difficult wars in the Middle East. And for Israel especially, the entire Middle East was about to change. We didn't even know this in 2009, but the entire Middle East, as we've known it for the previous century, was about to unravel. Egypt was going to undergo not one, but two violent revolutions. Syria and Egypt essentially were going to cease to exist. And in the middle of this, the Iranians are building a nuclear program. They started off with 6,000 centrifuges. In 2009, they would soon get 19,000 centrifuges. They'd be digging underground, secret fortified facilities, such as the facility at Fordow. All that was going to happen in a very short period of time at 2009. And the peace process, meanwhile, is dead in the water. I came into office right after an earlier Israeli government had offered Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas a full peace plan. Palestinian state in virtually the entire West Bank, all of Gaza, half of Jerusalem, and Mahmoud Abbas walked away. And when I came into office, he wasn't even willing to sit down and negotiate with us. So this is a really ideal situation to take over the U.S. Israel relationship. And all of a sudden, not only am I charged with maintaining an alliance, but I have an immense gaps and divides that I'm supposed to bridge. And it is precisely at this juncture, and I can think of few more fateful junctures in history, that you have two leaders that are exceedingly mismatched. How should I say this undiplomatically? You have Benjamin Netanyahu, and then you have the newly elected 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama. So look at the portrait of these two men. Netanyahu got a great resume. He was a commander in Israel's Delta Force. He went to MIT and Harvard. He became an economist. He served as the second in command at the embassy across the street, the DCM. He was Israel's ambassador to the UN. He was a very successful finance minister, foreign minister. He was a prime minister and an author. And that is his resume. Although politically, he wasn't particularly revered around the world. He wasn't widely respected in his own country, or rather rambunctious democracy. And we Israelis, unlike Americans, Americans salute the rank. Israelis don't salute anybody, nothing. And contrast him to Obama. Obama didn't have Netanyahu's experience, and certainly not military experience, legislative experience, foreign policy experience, but Obama is an icon. Obama is an icon certainly in this country and throughout much of the world. So you have complete opposites, these two men. But not only their resumes and their popularities were disparate, they had different worldviews, very different worldviews. You had Netanyahu, who is, he hates political correctness. Hates political correctness. He never uses the word paradigm. For some reason, doesn't like the word paradigm. He sort of like the anti-rock hero in a way. One of the first things that Netanyahu does when he's reelected is he hangs a large portrait of Winston Churchill over his right shoulder in his office, so that Churchill will always be looking over his right shoulder, because he reveres Churchill. Barack Obama comes into office. He is he's sort of the embodiment of PC. He's very cool. He is a rock star. And one of his first acts in office is to take a bust of Winston Churchill and remove it from the Oval Office. All right, so you really have two people with very different worldviews. But beyond that, there is policy. There is policy. And I'll make the case very strongly in the book that the Obama administration, as part of its worldview, was to change some of the essential components of the relationship, the alliance, certainly as it existed since the mid-1980s, since the mid-Reagan years. And the two pillars of the relationship, as I knew it, as I was briefed even coming into office across the street, were no surprises and no daylight. What does that mean? No surprises means that if America is going to make a major statement on the Middle East and on issues that impact Israel's vital interests and certainly our security, that Israel will have a chance to see an advanced copy of the text. We'll have a chance to submit our comments about it. A classic example would be George Bush's roadmap of 2002. And that the drafts of the roadmap were given to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and he had a chance to say how much he didn't like it, okay, and to submit all sorts of reservations. So that was no surprises. And by the way, it cuts both ways. This was not supposed to surprise the United States either. No daylight meant that we could have differences, and I've mentioned some of the differences already, settlements, Jerusalem, but we should try to keep those differences behind closed doors. Because if we have our differences publicly, our enemies are going to conclude that there's distance and daylight between us. They will insinuate themselves between us, and it will be bad for both countries. It will be damaging for both our interests. Now, as a matter of policy, the president, to distinguish himself perhaps from previous presidents, and because of his own worldview, decided not to maintain these two principles. And we had very examples of it. I accompanied Netanyahu to his first visit to the White House, which was in May of 2009, the first of 12 meetings he would have with the president. I was present at all of them. And and in that meeting, the prime minister was surprised. The president made a demand for a complete freeze of settlement building in the West Bank, but also a complete freeze of building in the Jewish neighborhoods of Jerusalem that were beyond the 1967 lines in Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem was divided before 1967 and then reunited by Israel afterward. So this was a big surprise. The president also demanded that the prime minister recognize the two-state solution, embrace the two-state solution. Now, it was a surprise for many reasons. First of all, because no Israeli leader actually can freeze building in Jerusalem. It's against the law. That is, Jerusalem is sovereign Israeli territory. It was formally annexed in the summer of 1967. And that's like asking, I don't know, it's like expecting the President of the United States to freeze building in Pittsburgh. It can't be done legally. But keep in mind that Netanyahu also came from a certain party, which was center-right, the Likud. And the Likud was a party that had supported settlement building and had rejected the two-state solution. So already this was a difficulty. So much for no surprises. But then it was made into daylight. These demands were made very, very publicly and created a difficult situation. We immediately had daylight, and there was a conversation that I reproduce in the book where the president says openly, I'm going to put daylight between Israel and the United States. It's a policy decision. And so that was an example of a surprise and a daylight. A month later, in June 2009, the president travels to Cairo, skips over Israel. Everyone noticed it in Israel, and he gives the Cairo speech, which is a remarkable document. It's worth a study in and of itself. It has a good chunk of part in the book because it is a foundational document. It's the president addressing what he calls the Muslim world, and it's twice as long as the first inaugural address. It's very, very well thought out and detailed, but it touches on a number of issues which are crucial to Israel's security. It's unprecedented support for the Palestinian cause. It is reconciliation above all with Iran and recognition of Iran's right to have a peaceful nuclear program. Now that may seem rather trivial today, but back in 2009 it was a significant departure from previous American policy. We never had a chance to look at the Cairo speech. It was a complete shock. I watched it together with senior Israeli officers at our Pentagon, the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, and everybody was looking at the television saying, oh my God, we had no idea this was coming. And this was the pattern. We never, of the major policy statements made by the president on Middle Eastern issues, we never got a previous look. The most difficult example was the speech that the president gave on May 19th, 2011. It was supposed to be a speech about the Arab Spring. It was not supposed to be a speech about Israeli-Palestinian issues. On the previous day, I was in the White House and assured that it would not deal with Palestinian and Israeli issues, but much of that speech was about the 67 borders with swaps. Now, this gets into sort of minutiae of the peace process, but the notion that the peace between Israel and the Palestinians, a two-state solution, should be based on the 67 borders with swaps was, according to the formula that we worked out over the course of many days with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, that was designed as a Palestinian goal, not an American goal. And so what the president did in that speech was move it from being a Palestinian goal to an Israeli goal, and it created quite a stir. And you may recall that the next day the prime minister arrived and supposedly lectured the president in the Oval Office. Remember that? I can only tell you they didn't lecture the president in the office because I wrote the script, and all of his remarks were directed at the Palestinians, not at the president. But you get a sense of just how tense things were as a result of having no surprises and no daylights. Now, does this mean that Israel didn't make mistakes and didn't itself violate the no daylight and no surprises? We surprised Vice President Biden, who came to Israel, a great friend of Israel. We surprised him. Somebody in the Interior Ministry announced a housing project in East Jerusalem, and he was surprised, and it created quite, as they say in Washington, a kerfuffle. And then 6 months later, the Prime Minister flew off to New Orleans to meet with Vice President Biden, and we did it again. And we surprised him. But I have to say that this was not a matter of policy. Netanyahu, and I was with him both times when this happened, was as much surprised as Vice President Biden was, and he apologized. This was not a matter of policy, and frankly, we should have been much more. We should have much more discipline, and we put into place an architecture that enabled us to better know when these announcements were coming and prepare our American counterparts for them. We could have done a much better job of defraying the impression that Israel was involved in the 2012 presidential elections. We were not involved, and the big chunk of the book also deals with the efforts of myself and other people on my staff to stay out of those elections, but there was an impression created. We could have done more to stay out of it. So it's not as if anybody has the monopoly over mistakes, but the fact that there were policy decisions taken by this administration had long-term ramifications. And very few of them were favorable. What can I say? And it goes to the question of trust, because when we come down to the big Iranian issue, the question of whether these two governments can trust each other within the framework of the alliance becomes very important. Does all of this mean that Barack Obama is anti-Israel? Because you get this all the time. He's anti-Israel. Sometimes they say word things. And I want to say to you unequivocally, unreservedly, no. He's not anti-Israel. He's pro-Israel. Sometimes his image of the Israel he'd like to see does not accord with the reality of Israel today. It's not the Israel of the Likud. It's not the Israel of the settlers. He has said several times that his images of Israel that he admired was a pre-1967 Israel, which I think is kind of a mythic image of Israel. Israel is actually much more democratic and open today than it was before 1967. But no, and I had many examples, many times where we needed the president, and he was there for us. In December 2010, I was across the street from the White House going into the White House Hanukkah party, right? Not to be missed. It's always funny because they already had the Christmas decorations up in the White House, and you have this surreal look of all these Jews in various kinds of headwear in front of all the wreaths and the holly and the mistletoe and stuff and the trees. It's kind of a surreal thing. I was ready to go into the Hanukkah party, and I got a call from the Prime Minister of Israel using a voice that you don't want to hear him use. It was a panicked voice saying that a huge fire had just broken out in the Carmel forest and 26 people were dead. It was the worst forest fire in Israel's history. It was descending on Haifa. We had nothing to stop it with. We had run out of retardant. It's that orange stuff they throw out of the back of planes. We had no extinguishing planes. And we're in trouble. And the Prime Minister said, listen, we got to save Haifa. Go in, talk to the president as soon as you can, get us help. And I said, well, the good news is I'm across the street from the White House. I'll go in and I'll ask for help. So I go in. I ran into to the First Lady's Chief of Staff, Susan Scher, who grew up in New Jersey with me and whose father played tennis with my father. And I said, can't make this up. I said, I got to see the president right away. I told her about the fire. She says, come right in. Go to the president. And I said, Mr. President, Israel needs you. This horrible fire has consumed human lives, millions of trees, and we need the retardant, we need the planes. President Obama turned immediately to his right-hand man, Reggie Love, and he says, get the ambassador everything he needs right now. And that night we set up in a sort of an emergency room in the NSC, in the West Room. We stayed there all night long into the next day. And the U.S. military scrubbed warehouses across Europe to get us the retardant. America had 11 firefighting planes. We got 8 of them. We also got these hotshot commandos who parachute behind fires, and they can take out fires. They left Boise, Idaho that night and went off from Newark the next morning to Israel. And they arrived in time to actually fight the fire. So when people come to tell me that Obama's anti-Israel, he wasn't there when we needed him, it's simply not true. And the book contains stories like this. And I often have a hard time even telling that story. I get choked up again. I'm very sentimental. But the divides. And the divides were there, and the divides were never so deep and so chasm-like as on the issue of Iran. And this goes back to the worldview. The president, when he comes into office in 2009, one of his first acts of office is to give a New Year's greeting to the Iranian people. He comes out and says, I want to get onto a different page with Iran, recognizes Iran's right, first of all, to have a peaceful nuclear energy, later to actually enrich uranium, which, by the way, not many countries in the world do. And this is a problem for the state of Israel. And that's an understatement that it's a problem. Why is it a problem? First of all, understand what the Iranian nuclear program means for us. It is not just one existential threat. It is several existential threats. The obvious one is that they break out or sneak out of whatever restrictions have been placed on them, and they make a bomb. According to the program on the ground, the deal that's been proposed, it'll take them a year. According to an op-ed piece that appeared in the New York Times earlier this week by one of the nation's leading experts on the subject, Alan Cooperman, they could do it in less than a month. That's too short for us. It's just too short. The Iranians already have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach. They can reach most of Central Europe, but they can certainly reach any city in the state of Israel. And those missiles have one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to carry a nuclear warhead. And we are a one-bomb country. We are the size of New Jersey. That's it, only one bomb. But that's only the beginning of the threat. The threat continues. The threat is that once Iran gets the bomb, the terrorists get the bomb, because Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Iran is sponsoring terrorism on 5 continents, now in 35 cities. During my time in Washington, they threatened to blow up my embassy. They threatened to blow up the Cafe Milano. Irrespective of what you think about the Cafe Milano, they were going to blow it up in Georgetown. This is serious. They were going to kill hundreds of people. They were going to kill hundreds of people. This is the Iranian regime. So the terrorists will get it, and you don't have to worry about a missile. You can have a nuclear weapon coming in a ship container. And once Iran gets the bomb, everybody gets the bomb. Egypt gets the bomb, Saudi Arabia gets the bomb, Turkey gets the bomb. Israel finds itself living in a nuclear neighborhood which is profoundly unstable, and who knows who's going to be controlling these countries in the coming years. So it's multiple existential threats for us. Now, does this mean we couldn't talk to the administration about the Iranian issue? No. The answer is absolutely no. We did talk, and we had an intimate, continuing dialogue. I participated in these talks. They're classified, but I'll tell you this. They were very candid, and we looked at the same data, and we derived some of the same conclusions about the nature of the program, what the Iranians had, what they could do with what they had, and what amount of time. Very, very similar conclusions. Where did we differ? We differed over structural issues. And this is going to sound so simplistic, and I apologize, okay? But America, brace yourself. America is a big country. America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. It's not threatened with national annihilation by the Iranians. And America has the largest military capabilities in the world. You have B-2 bombers. You've got aircraft carriers. Wonderful things. Israel is a small country. We are located in the backyard of Iran. We are threatened with genocide weekly by the Iranian leadership. And while the IDF is this wonderful army, it's twice as big as the French and British armies combined. It's a wonderful army. But we don't have strategic bombers. We don't have aircraft carriers. So our margin for error over Iran is exactly zero. Zero. We cannot afford to make the slightest mistake on this. America has some leeway. It really does. But in addition to the structural differences, there were the ideological and conceptual differences. And maybe these were the most important differences of all. What do they say? The president has gone on record, and it's good to be my skills as an historian, I always go back and look for quotes, but the president actually talks a tremendous amount about his feelings and his perceptions, so I don't have to do much research. It's just have to quote him. He has called the Iranian regime a rational regime. It's anti-Semitic, but it's rational. That he believes that if properly engaged, the Iranian regime, Iran can be a responsible regional power. It can actually help resolve the conflict between Sunnis and Shiites. It operates on a cost-benefit basis. That contrasts that with Israel's position. Israel's position in Iran, though it sometimes takes rational steps, those rational steps are geared to achieve insane goals, and among them the destruction of my country, and that they are a messianic, jihadist, cult-type regime that is supporting terror and all the things that I've spoken away. The president has said openly that Iran is not North Korea. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Iran is worse than 50 North Koreas. Okay? So how big a gap can you get? conceptually. How big a gap conceptually? And the gap widened perhaps unbridgeably, starting in November of 2013, when it became clear that the United States had been negotiating without telling Israel, with Iran secretly, and had reached an interim agreement that would preserve the infrastructure of the Iranian nuclear program. All of the centrifuges, many of them would be detached, but they would still be there. They wouldn't be dismantled. And that all of the facilities would also remain intact. Some of them would be altered so much to remain them less lethal. But the actual program would be retained. And the biggest problem from Israel's perspective was that there was no connection between lifting settled sanctions, which have been put into place over the course of a decade, lifting sanctions, any change in Iranian behavior. They didn't have to give up terror. They didn't have to give up trying to undermine pro-Western governments in the region. They didn't have to give up trying to destroy us. That was a true problem for us. And the situation kept on deteriorating. The discourse deteriorated tremendously. People saying things about the United States in Israeli governments that they shouldn't. Can I say the word chicken shit here? Okay. There was someone in the White House called the Prime Minister chicken shit, and I spent 12 hours on Israeli television trying to find a translation for the word chicken shit. It doesn't quite work in Hebrew. Let me get this. Chicken didn't work. They don't get it. And then the Prime Minister made a decision in last March to give a speech before the joint meeting of Congress. And that surprised the President. Here, breakdown of no surprises, that principle. I was already running for government at the time. I was not in the Prime Minister's party. I opposed the decision to hold that speech there, but I completely agreed with the content of the speech. I more than agreed with the content of the speech. It was spot on. This is the Prime Minister's duty. It's his responsibility. It's his right to speak these things. And he speaks not just for his own party. He speaks for the people of Israel. It's the closest thing we have to a national consensus. I'm in Knesset. We agree on nothing. We scream at each other without end. We throw chairs. We would throw chairs. They're screwed down. But on the Iranian issue, almost no disagreement whatsoever. That this is a bad deal. And that the alternative to a bad deal is no deal. Alternative to a bad deal is a better deal. And that we reject this binary notion that it's either negotiations or war. No, there's a third way. There's negotiations for a better deal, which can be achieved by ramping up the sanctions that brought the Iranians to the negotiating table to begin with, and by putting into place a credible military threat, so that the Iranians understand that they are paying a price for their program, but at the end of the day, there will be a military price, and a military response, and they will not actually have the bomb. That is where we stand. So we have these deep divides, we have this name calling, and it becomes a certain point in the book where I say to my reader, there's just one word I have, and that is stop. Enough already. We've been going at this now for 6 years. And the book is really a plea. It's a plea to both Americans and Israelis. It's a plea to Israeli Jews and American Jews, there's a large segment on that, to stop. And let's take a deep breath and see what we have and what we stand to lose. What we have is a unique alliance. It's, as I said earlier, as I opened my remarks, it's unparalleled by anything else in the world. And we need each other. Israel knows that there's no alternative to the United States as its primary background, not just for military aid, but standing with us in international forums, defending our common democratic values. And the United States knows that it has no alternative to Israel, certainly not in the Middle East, and perhaps beyond the Middle East, a country that is scientifically, technologically, democratically robust, militarily strong, and which is completely, unabashedly pro-American. You're not going to see American flags burnt in the streets of Tel Aviv. Where's that? Where can you say that about today? So we have one another, and we have to be, above all, grateful for this, and begin to think about ways how we can begin to restore this relationship, which is so crucial for us. In the last 4 pages, I go into as kind of a prescription about how both sides can begin the process of repair and strengthening and get us to where we are. This is a relationship which I am deeply convinced, to this day, in spite of everything we've gone through, is deeply convinced, is vital not only for the security of the United States and Israel, not only for what remains of Middle East stability, but it is beneficial for the entire world. because the entire world looks at this alliance as a litmus of America's dependability as an ally and Israel's viability as a sovereign state in the Middle East. The book is a testament, it's a confession, it's a cri de coeur. Truly, it comes from a deep place of love and caring. It does. It's a testament to the love I still feel for the country of my birth to the country of my birthright, the land of my father to the land of my forefathers. It's a call to restore one of the great alliances of modern history, ally. Thank you. Now the hard questions. Oh, the other questions. Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Right.
President, he's nearing the end of his term. A year and a half from now, he'll be out of office. Are you concerned? How concerned are you that in these next few days that he will be more concerned with his legacy than with supporting the state of Israel?
I think legacy is an important. You all heard the question. I think legacy is an important issue. It's a legitimate issue for a president at the end of a second term. Everyone thinks about their legacy, and I in the book I explore what I hope to coin a couple of phrases. One of the phrases I hope to coin was Kishka issue, and I identified several Kishka issues in foreign policy that the president had. One of them was reconciling with Iran, support for the Palestinians, and for the Palestinian cause, or resolution for the Palestinian issue based on the two-state solution. And I would always use this phrase with Israeli policymakers, saying, "You must understand, though he seems to be engaged with something else, maybe healthcare. These issues are so deep-rooted within him, he's going to come back to them." And I don't think I've been wrong on that. He's coming back to the Iranian issue, and I'm willing to wager he's going to come back to the Palestinian issue. And he's going to try to build his legacy on the two of them. And that poses challenges for Israel. You're going to, if those of you who actually read this book and find this is a book where I talk about the policymaking process, where I make a certain recommendation to the prime minister. I say, say to him, rope-a-dope. Those of us of a certain generation remember that, just take a few punches on issues like the peace process. Be flexible as you can, but on issues that really are a matter of national survival, like Iran, then you can dig your heels in. There was a different approach back home. You'll read about that debate. But last November, there was a victory for the Senate, for the Republicans in the Senate, and the Israeli public part of it said, "Oh, now he won't be able to do anything for us. We'll get off our back. No more Iran. No more Palestinians." And I got on Israeli president. I got television. I said, "No, you're misreading this. A president who was blocked from advancing domestic policy by Republican Congress is going to turn to foreign policy, where he has the greatest prerogative. And you should know." Coming to a neighborhood near you is going to be more presidential dealings, attention given to the Iranian issue, to the Palestinian issue, to other issues in the Middle East that will impact us, like nonproliferation. And so I think it's something that Israel has to take very seriously. And among the policy recommendations that I have at the end of the book is that when we make decisions, we always have to take into account their ramifications, impact on American policy. We have to see the world not only through our eyes, but through American eyes. And superpower sees the world very differently. And we have to acknowledge that we have to say to America all the time, thank you, thank you, thank you. And only infrequently, with great reluctance, once in a while, we have to say, thank you, but. This, on Iran, is a thank you, but moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk about the increase in anti-Semitism described as anti-Israel feeling throughout increasing amount of the world. Like your thoughts about that, and also with increasing light between the United States and Israel, to what extent has that encouraged or emboldened some of this thinking, particularly recent comments out of the White House that we might not support Israel the next time issues come up at the United Nations? Is that further emboldening this anti-Israel, anti-Semitic view?
I don't want to say it's further emboldening anti-Semitism, but it's certainly emboldening European countries that want to boycott us. Now, the administration has said for quite a long time that we're not going to cut aid to Israel, and I don't think Congress would let anybody cut aid to Israel. Congress is always increasing aid to Israel. But the administration's line has been, we can't control those Europeans. So Europe basically serves as a stick. When I meet a lot of European leaders now and diplomats, and I always say, don't you ever get sick of being America's stick? You know, why can't you have a more productive role, and a more nuanced role? But every time someone in the administration or the State Department says that publicly, you know, we can't. Israel's going to be more isolated. Israel's going to turn into an apartheid state. Israel's going to be boycotted. It's going to be sanctioned. That sounds to us like a threat. That's like I said. My friend Jeffrey Goldberg once said it on CNN. Said, you know, it sounds like nice Jewish state you got here. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. I can't say it any better than Jeff did. But it sounds like a threat, and that is the way it's interpreted. And I think that there are elements in the world, in Europe, among the Palestinians, who see that and see daylight and are encouraged. They're encouraged to go to the International Criminal Court of Justice. The French have been encouraged now to perhaps put down a Security Council resolution which will not be to Israel's advantage and put us in a very difficult position. I think it's a problem. That comes under the rubric of daylight, but that's like searing daylight. Don, Don Spear is one of my heroes. You don't know this. He's one of the great oarsmen of all time. There's a whole section about rowing in here.
There is?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, I'll get the book.
Yeah.
Actually, I got it, and I haven't read it yet,
Yeah.
Michael, but thank you for, as always, a wonderful talk and really, really important insights. And I haven't read the last 4 pages with the recommendations, but my question is, can they possibly happen, whatever they are, with Mr. Netanyahu and Ron Dermer and President Obama and I forget who our ambassador is to Israel.
Dan Shapiro. Yeah.
With the 4 of them in place.
I won't try to belittle the question or dodge the question. The great thing about not being ambassador anymore, I don't have to dodge questions.
That's why
anymore.
I asked.
That's right. I get that. And the answer is no. It won't be easy. It won't be easy. Is it imperative upon all of us? Is it incumbent upon all of us to try? Yes, it's incumbent on all of us to try. I think if the Iran agreement is signed, and frankly, if I were on the other side, if I'm on the Iranian side, I would not sign it because they have been, it has been demonstrated to them repeatedly that the longer they hold out, the more concessions they get, right? So think about it from their perspective. They can hold out a little bit longer. Watch this. Watch see if it gets delayed a bit. That's an opportunity, perhaps, to begin a conversation. And I think that I would not say that the situation is hopeless, not even this now, but we have to also think long term. And the Middle East is not going to get more stable. I was in the book. I talk about the Arab Spring, and everyone seems to want to point to one place as a success. So for a while, the administration says, "Look at Yemen, it's great," right? And then there was a while there was look at Egypt. Now the latest one was look at Tunisia. Latest one, look at Tunisia. I also stress the case that unlike Vietnam, where you could push a couple of helicopters off an aircraft carrier and go home, there's no going home from the Middle East because the Middle East is going to come to you. And ISIS is expanding. And so this alliance is not going to get less important as the years go on. The alliance is going to get manifoldly more important as the years go on. So we're going to have no choice, Don, but at some point to sit down and thrash this out and get in a better place. That's my answer. Thanks. Fellow rowers here. Yes, here.
One of my favorite parts of Ally was reading about the trips that you and Yitzhak Sokolov, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name.
You are. Yeah.
Took to the Soviet Union. What would you say are among the most important impacts that trip has had on your journey and career?
Wow. So the book tells a story. I told you I went into the Army. I did mention this in my speech, but when I got out of the Army, it was during the dark days of Brezhnev in the Soviet Union. There were 3 million Soviet Jews who weren't free. They were denied the right to practice their religion, certainly denied the right to move to Israel, even to learn Hebrew. It was illegal to learn Hebrew. Study Hebrew in the Soviet Union. You can go to labor camp for 10 years for studying Hebrew. Unbelievable. It's hard to imagine today. This is not distant history. And the state of Israel took upon itself to send teams underground into the Soviet Union at some risk and to make contact with the Zionist underground, people who were studying Hebrew literally in cellars at night, All of them knew they were going to be arrested. They all knew they were going to Siberia, but they studied anyway. And I came out of the Army. I had 2 passports back then. I didn't have them now. And so did Yitzhak Sokolov. We went to college together. He was in the Golani Brigade. I was in the paratroopers, and we went together. And we made contact with the Zionist underground. A young man met us at the train station. We had we had to memorize all the names of our contacts in Russian, all the phone numbers, and all the addresses in Russian. Oh my! But there was one that was easy. Sally's maiden name was Edelstein, and our first contact in Moscow was a young man named Yuli Edelstein. And so I was able to remember the name pretty well and his number, and he met us there, and that began our excursion. And the book tells some of harrowing stories of being arrested by the KGB, repeatedly interrogated by the PGB. I don't wish this on anybody. I don't go into great detail of what the KGB did, but the experience transformed me again, if you can, because I met the most courageous, intrepid, extraordinary human beings I'd ever encountered in my life. Some of them were 16-year-old kids. One of them, the head of the Odessa Underground, was a 16-year-old girl who was about 4'9", and was afraid of nothing, and literally saved my life. She saved my life. I was about to be set upon by KGB thugs, and she threw herself at this thug and said, hit me instead. One of these scenes. And again, I describe this book. So it stayed with me forever. Every time I came up against a tough situation, whether in battle or in Washington, I would remember what these people did. End of the story is I got elected to Knesset and I was sworn in. And the night I was sworn in, I had my first vote. And my first vote was to vote in favor of a candidate for the Speaker of the Knesset. And his name is Yuli Edelstein. Thank you.
Well, you certainly, ever since I can remember, I've admired Israel and felt the kinship.
There's a but at the end of the sentence?
There's a but, yes. I also think you speak about it very well, and I've enjoyed your books. But, yes.
There we go. Okay. I know. I can sense it.
Yes, I don't know how. The Israeli-Palestinian issue is just
it's a mess.
Open sore.
It is.
And the settlements.
There's no but
you referred a couple of times, but sort of glossed over the settlements issue. And to me, that's really the crux of a lack of desire to really settle the issue, and combine that with what seemed to me the awful statements that Netanyahu made on the eve of the election.
Which are in the book, by the way. I don't gloss over anything.
But I just don't understand not taking any action on the settlements, which are just a continuing provocation.
Okay, I agree with you. Listen, I'm not an ambassador anymore. I'm not a spokesman for anybody other than myself and my party. And one of the reasons I joined the party I'm in, it's called Kulanu, is that I could be the architect of its diplomatic platform. And without going into too much, it's a great Obama administration word, too much granularity, is that there was an agreement struck, I think a very important diplomatic agreement struck between then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and then President George Bush in 2004, the Bush-Sharon letter, which recognized that in the event that there would be a two-state solution, that Israel would retain certain territories. With maybe some swaps, but the idea was that there would be major Jewish neighbors of Jerusalem, which over half the Jews of Jerusalem live over what was not the 1967 borders, and the settlement blocks in which 85% of the settlers live, but only account for less than 2% of the West Bank. That's the basic math here. Less than 2% of the math. 85% of the settlers live in less than 2% of the West Bank. That's the math. And that agreement was abandoned by Obama. Netanyahu also did not stand by that agreement. And so what it meant was there was no difference in building in a certain neighborhood in Jerusalem and building in an outlying settlement, which was a mistake as far as I was concerned. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. So as part of my diplomatic platform for my party, and you can read it, it was in the Wall Street Journal about 3 months ago, it's called the two-state situation. What I say is right now, We don't really have a partner on the other side of the table. Mahmoud Abbas is busy suing us for war crimes. We don't know what a Palestinian state would look like if we created it. It wouldn't have institutions. It wouldn't have an economy. It would have a corrupt, unelected leadership. States like that don't last very long. I don't know if you know this, but Mahmoud Abbas was going to be killed by Hamas last summer. We saved him. The IDF saved him. If the IDF would pull out, he'd last how long, Steve? Steve served in the West Bank. Not very long. So we have to be realistic. What does the two-state situation says? We only build in those areas settlements that are going to be part of our state. We don't build in any area that may be part of some future Palestinian state. We are always at the table, even though the chair opposite us is empty, and we remain committed to the idea, at least, of a two-state solution. I think if we adopt that, we will go a long way to protecting ourselves against boycotts in Europe. I think we can have a new conversation with people in Washington. I'm saying this from experience. And it's not the current policy of the entire government, but it's our policy, and I'm going to be fighting for it. I agree with you.
I think we may need to move toward bundling a
Let's
couple of questions.
have like 2 or 3 questions together, and I'll just do them very quickly.
Quickly, in the context of Speaker Boehner's invitation to Netanyahu,
yes,
there were some small cracks in the solid bipartisan support, if not for Israel, at least for Netanyahu. Do you have any concern about any danger to the solidity of bipartisan support for Israel coming out of those circumstances?
Okay, it's a legitimate question. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Mine's different.
It doesn't matter. I'll bundle them.
I think it's going to be hard.
Okay, try it. Give me a shot. I'm pretty good at this.
This is detailed.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay.
Short though.
This
Short
is a
on
different
details.
question. Okay, you mentioned that the nuclear facilities in Iran have increased by the thousands in the
Centrifuges, yes.
Centrifuges, so my misunderstanding about this nuclear deal is right now we have a P5+1 coalition of countries, and we have sanctions on Iran. And if there is no nuclear deal and Russia pulls out and China pulls out and these countries
I know this question.
can support Israel. So what would prevent Iran from creating a nuclear weapon? What other solution do you see? I don't see
Very
that
legitimate
Iran
question,
would
and
stop.
something that we take that question very seriously. By the way, we pondered it at length. So yes, I got it. Let's take one more, and I'll answer these 3.
Thank you so much again for coming. I'm a history teacher up at Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, so
you're
welcome to speak anytime you'd like when you're here. I teach a course on Arab-Israeli conflict, so I'm curious, as a historian, do you think part of that course should entail some sort of U.S. Israel relationship? And if so, as a historian, where area of history do you think that should encompass? Like current day, back in the 70s with Nixon relationship, any specific area you think students should be aware of in that relationship?
That's the easy question. Okay, let me take the easy one. Obviously, it should. The Arab-Israeli conflict, I've taught at many universities here in the United States, and there's always an Arab-Israeli conflict. It's kind of a misnomer. What is the Arab-Israeli conflict? Right now we have a conflict with Iran. They're not Arabs, right? Sometimes we're in conflict with the Soviet Union. They weren't Arabs. And sometimes the United States gets dragged in, and they're not Israelis or Arabs. So I think that as part of your syllabus on the course, there should be one book about the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's very difficult to understand the conflict without understanding that part of it. Because the United States has been dragged in not just materially, but diplomatically, strategically, even physically. American soldiers. So I think it's definitely very important. On your question about bipartisanship, preserving bipartisan support for Israel is a paramount strategic national interest for Israel. God forbid that support for the state of Israel should become the monopoly of one party or another. It will be very, very dangerous for us. And again, it's one of the prescriptions at the end of the book that we always have to ask ourselves, what is the impact of any decision we make on bipartisan support? Every once in a while we may get to a juncture where it's a very difficult decision. Right now on the Iranian issue, it's hugely difficult. And in the degree that I was not supportive of the Prime Minister and not an easy call for me on the decision to go to Congress, it was because of my fears about bipartisan support. I did not agree with the content of the speech. It was the venue, and it is becoming increasingly difficult. I intimated earlier in my talk. political polarization where you can't get anything done in this town. It's very difficult because people, it's so deep. I described the elections of 2012. It was a profoundly traumatic period for me because both parties were trying to drag us into the debate. By the way, the first video clip that said that the other party is anti-Israel was a Democratic clip, not a Republican clip. Interesting enough, and I starred in it. They had the little clips for me. You have asked a very tough question. It's one we ask ourselves, and here is our answer. The answer is the Israeli intelligence estimate is that the Russians, the Chinese, and others will be extremely reluctant to detach themselves from the $17 trillion American economy, even if they don't like the fact that Congress or the president backs away from an Iranian deal. And that the sanctions will more or less maintain that Iran will not be able to recover, and there can be further sanctions levied by the United States on Iran to make up for any slippage in the sanctioned regime. So that argument was that the sanctions can't be maintained, that if the Chinese and the Russians feel that the United States is not negotiating in good faith and they'll walk away at the sanctions, that hasn't been substantiated by our analysis.
Even with the Russian-American alienation?
Even the Russians, the big fear there is not that they're going to break the sanctions. The big fear is that the Russians will sell hardware, military hardware, in particular one anti-aircraft system, which is problematic. Russians need cash, but that's not going to help the Iranian economy any. The Iranians are actually going to be paying money for it, not getting money. All right.
This will be the last question.
A very significant thing happened today with the Supreme Court decision, and I think we can attribute it to the young people so firmly for gay marriage. Everything I read in the young people in Iran is how they're pro-Western, they don't like the government, and that, so when you talk about what's going to happen, do you ever factor in changes emanating from older people dying off, younger people coming in? Is that something?
High unemployment, and I want to answer your question in two ways. Let me ask you about. I'm going to spin around, but I'm going to come back to the Supreme Court ruling today, which is quite extraordinary and moving. Iran had a dry run for the Arab Spring in June 2009. They got the break that Mubarak didn't get, and they learned how to cope with it. They created a 1 million-man force. They have these thugs called the Basij. You go on an anti-government website in Iran, and you get a knock on the door within 2 minutes, and the third minute you're gone. Right? They have learned to cope with these things, and the Iranian people, to a certain degree, have learned to even cope with some of the sanctions. And that is why when negotiators for P5+5 thought P5+1 talk about a 10-year period, what's called the sunset period, and they think, well, it's 10 years. We don't think that's a long period of time. Not with the type of monstrous anti-rebellion architecture that the Iranians have put in place. It could pass very, very quickly. Meanwhile, the Iranians will be building their program. They'll be putting more advanced centrifuges in because it's about numbers of centrifuges. They're continuing their research, continuing their military part. And at 10 years plus 1 day, they won't move ahead to 1 bomb. They can move ahead to 200 bombs. It's called sunset to arsenal. It's actually a term. That's a big fear. So I would love to think that somewhere along the line, Iranian young people will say, enough. We want a different future for ourselves. We've had it with this corrupt regime. I'd like to think so, but I just can't. As an Israeli, again, we have no margin for error. We can't bank on that. We just can't. About today's ruling, though, and what it means for America, what it means for Israel. It's interesting. You know, I talk about some of the great moments that I felt privileged to be ambassador here, and one of them was I was invited to give the keynote address at the Equality Forum, which is the annual LGBT convention in Philadelphia. It was held, and I talked about the struggle within Israel for LGBT rights. Israel was and remains a world leader in LGBT rights. We just had Asia's largest gay parade in Tel Aviv down the street from our house last week. But we have a way to go. We have a way to go on a lot of rights. But I just want to share just a one vignette from my time in Knesset, because I've been living in Israel for now close to 40 years, and I thought I pretty much knew this country. I've served as a diplomat, soldier, everything. And I go into Knesset and I found I actually know nothing. And so about 3 weeks ago, I hosted Lindsey Graham for lunch. Okay, and I worked a lot with Lindsay. He comes to Israel all the time because he's involved in foreign affairs. He's never been to Knesset. And I took him into the plenary, and there was a debate in the plenary about, I told you this, David, the story. You get to hear it twice today. Sorry. There's a debate in the plenary about homophobia in the healthcare system. And a Christian woman, member of Knesset, gets up and talks about homophobia in the healthcare system. And she gets shouted down by some Druze member of Knesset. And then a right-wing Jew gets up and screams about something, and a left-wing Jew screams about something. And I was supposed to be there with a few minutes with Lindsay, and he actually wouldn't leave the plenary. He was fascinated by this. He couldn't get over it. This is actually happening. And then I left Lindsay, and I went to a forum. It's like a caucus. Which was a bipartisan, it's multi-partisan, like 8 parties are sponsoring this. My party is one of the sponsors of it. In a room roughly the size of this room, about 100 high school kids in there. All the high school kids are transgender kids. And the discussion was, how can we deepen awareness and sensitivity to the challenges of transgender teenagers? And we listened as these teenagers came up and told their stories. People were crying. And there are 2 extraordinary things about this moment. One is that it's happening a 2-hour drive from ISIS. Okay? The distance between what? Here in Philly, maybe? Less. And the other extraordinary thing is that I was the only person in that room who thought it was extraordinary. Because everyone else is thinking, of course this is happening here. It's Israel. It's what I've learned. And that's why, take it back, it's why we are deep allies. This is a true democracy. Yeah, we're going to have the differences. We're going to have the settlements. We're going to have this. Someday, God willing, we'll resolve them all. But at the end of the day, how many countries in the world do you have like this? And how many countries in the world do we have like this? Not many. Stop. Let's rebuild. Let's think. Thank you all to that. Thank you.